Yes, great to see you. Welcome if you're NAVS alumni to the familiar NAVS montage, and I don't know how involved you've been, but welcome back. And welcome actually if you're not, if for whatever reason you've been invited along. I was thinking about today for been praying and thinking about it for a few weeks. And there's some research out that kept coming back to me, which is on sort of Gen. When you get older, like myself, you're looking at sort of what Gen Z are all about, and now Gen A or Gen Alpha. And I found out that one of the highly prized values amongst Gen Z and Alpha was authenticity or sincerity. And as I thought about this, I thought there are many more people in this room probably better qualified than me to speak about NAVs or leadership or influence. But I think what we might bring is that most of those people, for me, down the years have been people who have been in full-time Christian ministry, most of my heroes. And we've tried to work this out whilst doing working life and family life, which I think is probably where many of you guys are. So if there's something that could be offered today, I think in terms of being authentic, frankly, it would just be to be very honest about our own walk, our own journey, the stuff we're doing. And so all my examples will pretty much be from what we've done. There'll be a lot of mixed experiences, but all my failures are authentic. They're my own. You'll be pleased to hear, and some of the successes too. So as we go on, we'll walk through together. But as I say, we'll reference a little bit of our own journey. Now, first slide now is just so you can see me in context. So I think it's been mentioned. I've been in general practice all my life. And I've freed up a little bit of time to do navigators. And the first context for us is that we are a family. As you can see, there's an imbalance in our families, a gender imbalance. We were going to get a dog who was going to be a boy, but we, at the last minute, we were told we couldn't have that dog because there was a problem, but we could have their sister. So our dogs, so we are. So it's a very female house, and me, we love being family together. And one of the big calls on all our lives is just trying to work out a call to making disciples within family. And I won't say too much, but those are our girls. We've got one plugged in with Edinburgh NAVS. Shout out for anyone? No? Anyway, Edinburgh NAVS. One has been at Exeter, one's at Bath, and then my wife and I, we are at a school in Wellington College where we run a boarding house, or rather she runs a boarding house and has 70 young people between 16 and 18 who we live next door and interact with all the time, which is a really exciting place to be. So that's us. So let's move on to Refuel and making your mark. Let's look at this together. As we look at the life of David, we're looking at a man who spans at least 55 chapters of the Bible, 1 and 2 Samuel, where he's the dominant character. We're looking at a man who wrote 73 Psalms, so has a huge presence in the Bible. And if you ask, is David an example of leadership? In many ways he is, and he was a great leader, although flawed. But I do like the lens of influence for David, because I don't think anyone can doubt the influence now, just scripturally, the sheer weight of testimony to his life, the way the Psalms have probably shaped all of our devotional lives, some of our singing that we've just been singing, haven't we? And the way his legacy, his kingship, his dynasty, as the key king of Israel, and obviously in David's line came the Lord Jesus. And if there's a verse that perhaps we're meant to look through to see David's life, it's surely this verdict that Samuel gives over him in 1 Samuel 13, that the Lord has sought out a man after his own heart and appointed him ruler of his people. And so as we look at the life of David, I think we're meant to see a man after God's heart. That's how he's summed up. And David is not perfect, but I think there are themes in his life that tell us something what it is to follow God, to walk closely with him and to follow God's heart. And so I can't speak on, you'll be delighted to hear all the chapters in David's life, of course not all his life, or even a tiny bit of his life. But I wanted us to land in one chapter, which is 1 Samuel 30. Because I think from it, 3 themes emerge that might help us today as we think about a life of influence. And I hope these things will be things that we can just play around with, think through, pray through throughout the day, interact with in seminars where hopefully much more of this stuff will be grounded. So let's look together at 1 Samuel 30, and I'm delighted to say I have an expert reader who will read the passages as we go along, and which means you get a different voice, which I think is a good thing.
David and his men reached Ziklag on the 3rd day. Now the Amalekites had raided the Negev and Ziklag. They had attacked Ziklag and burned it, and had taken captive the women and everyone else in it, both young and old. They killed none of them, but carried them off as they went on their way. When David and his men reached Ziklag, they found it destroyed by fire, and their wives and sons and daughters taken captive. So David and his men wept aloud until they had no strength left to weep. David's 2 wives had been captured, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. David was greatly distressed, because the men were talking of stoning him. Each one was bitter in spirit because of his sons and daughters, but David found strength in the Lord his God.
Thank you. So Emmy will be popping up now and then to keep reading, won't you? So, as we go through. So the first thing I wanted to look at was intimacy. First thing I want to look at is intimacy. And it comes from a famous verse in this passage, verse 6, that might be a special verse to you. It has been to many people. David was greatly distressed because the men were talking of stoning him. Each one was bitter in spirit because of his sons and daughters. But David found strength in the Lord his God. Or David strengthened himself, made himself secure, encouraged in God. It's difficult to imagine a lower, a more difficult moment than the one David's facing at the moment. He's under incredible pressure. David was anointed king 12 years earlier and was meant to be the new king of Israel. And yet what's happened is that he's been on the run from Saul. He's been unable to hide even in any of the southern towns in Israel, in Judah, and has been forced to take refuge in Philistia, where he's given a town, and he's got a bunch of outlaws and randoms around him. And things have got so bad that he's raiding nearby places, and things have got so bad that he's just been drafted into the Philistines' army with Achish, king of Gath, to fight against Israel. And as he goes up to fight against Israel, I don't know what could be going through his heart and his mind, but I think very mercifully the Lord turns it back and he doesn't have to fight against Israel. And so he returns home, and to this makeshift place where he lives, he finds everything is lost. His family are gone, the possessions are gone, the place is burnt. His men, who are not a nice bunch in many ways, have turned on him. They're embittered. They're grieving beyond measure. Beyond that, I wonder if you can imagine his life is a betrayal of all he was ever meant to be. Yeah, he is anathema to this king of Israel that he's called to be. So he's at the lowest ebb, and he's at unprecedented time pressure. If indeed these families have been carried off, by these raiders, he's got to chase after them, hasn't he? Time is of the essence. Things are urgent. And yet at that moment, David seeks intimacy with God. This is his default, is to turn to his Father. And so, trouble, failure, grief, persecution, pressure, hypocrisy, none of those are barriers to us meeting with God wherever we're at the moment. And I've had a couple of conversations with people already that have made me realise that I wonder whether today could be a significant time for returning to God and his heart for each of us. Out of this intimacy, there were two thoughts particularly that I see in David's life. First is that he pursues an honest relationship with God. The Lord, his God, the Lord, your God. It's deeply relational, but it's also deeply honest. As we read the Psalms, David writes, we can move on a slide, I think. We read that David writes, around this time, I love you, Lord, O my strength. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, my deliverer. My God is my rock, in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, and my stronghold. And David seeks not just the blessings of God when he comes to meet with God, but the person of God. I love you, Lord. You are my strength. You're my rock. You're my fortress. Whatever you're doing in life, particularly in Christian ministry, but also beyond it, there can be a pressure to be such an activist. We live very busy lives. I know many Christian ministers who I spend time with, whose lives are very busy. I'm very busy as a GP. And it can be tempting to think that ministry can occur, or growth, or happiness can occur in some way other than just turning to the Lord our God, being intimate with him, and strengthening ourselves in him. It's something we find so hard to learn. I'm looking at a very blank slide there. Is that able to change? Oh look, it is. There we go. So look, fill in some of the gaps. Something we find so hard to learn, but then in our business, in our rushing around, someone anchors us again and says it's about meeting with the Lord, and we drag ourselves away, and we actually sit down and we spend time with God. And I know that can be difficult in busy working life, I really do, with pressure of patience, whatever it is. I know that can be difficult with a young family, or a new baby, or going through all the stuff that just throws itself at us in life. But there is really no other way than to seek him first. One of the things I found in my early Christian life, someone shared a quote with me, which is the time you least feel like the quiet time is the time you most need it. And I have a lot of times when I don't feel like meeting with God. I really don't. I don't wake up wanting to spend time with God. I wake up driven by all the other urgent stuff. And yet my experiences... Oh, hello. That's only just come on, hasn't it? No, it's all right. Okay, good. Okay. Great. So, and yet my experience is that if I will make some space to turn to the Lord, and if I will be honest with Him, and that honesty can be, I mean, I've prayed so many prayers that are dishonest, you know, what I'm meant to pray, what I think I should pray. But if I pray an honest prayer to God, like, Lord, all I want to do right now is be somewhere else. Lord, I feel so broken at work. Lord, I feel a failure as a father. Whatever it is, if I'm honest with the Lord, quite quickly, often within 5-10 minutes, everything changes. And suddenly there is a sense of His Spirit, His resourcing, His energy, and every decision of the day looks different. I don't do it often enough, and sometimes those times are quite dishonest, and we don't get very far. At this moment, with all the pressures around him, David was able to seek the Lord his God and strengthen himself, because he desired God. Not now the answer, not straight away, he just desired God. More than approval, more than defending himself, more than chasing after his dreams that were in tatters around him. It's something we find so hard to learn, but perhaps intimacy is all we need to hear today. And so that's your first theme from David's life. Let's move on. I'm going to read the next section as we carry on the story. That's you, Amelia.
Then David said to Abiathar the priest, the son of Ahimelech, "Bring me the ephod." Abiathar brought it to him, and David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I pursue this raiding party? Will I overtake them?" "Pursue them," he answered. "You will certainly overtake them and succeed in the rescue." David and the 600 men with him came to Besor Valley, where some stayed behind. 200 of them were too exhausted to cross the valley, but David and the other 400 continued the pursuit. They found an Egyptian in a field and brought him to David. They gave him water to drink and food to eat, part of a cake of pressed figs and 2 cakes of raisins. He ate and was revived, for he had not eaten any food or drunk any water for 3 days and 3 nights. David asked him, "Who do you belong to? Where do you come from?" He said, "I am an Egyptian, the slave of an Amalekite. My master abandoned me when I became ill 3 days ago. We raided the Negev of the Kerethites, some territory belonging to Judah, and the Negev of Caleb, and we burned Ziklag." David asked him, "Can you lead me down to this raiding party?" He answered, "Swear to me before God that you will not kill me or hand me over to my master, and I will take you down to them." He led David down, and there they were, scattered over the countryside, eating, drinking, and reveling because of the great amount of plunder they had taken from the land of the Philistines and from Judah. David fought them for dusk until the evening of the next day, and none of them got away, except 400 young men who rode off on camels and fled. David recovered everything the Amalekites had taken, including his 2 wives. Nothing was missing, young or old, boy or girl, plunder or anything else they had taken. David brought everything back. He took all the flocks and herds, and his men drove them ahead of the other livestock, saying, "This is David's plunder."
Fantastic. Thanks, Ellie. So we've looked at intimacy, and I just think it's a theme that we see again and again through David's life. I mean, you have to look at the Psalms to know that is the case. Another theme or virtue I think we see here is that of endeavour. So the second just word I want to throw out there is endeavour for the day. Okay, you could change the word slightly if you want. I like the word endeavour, and so we'll look at that. And David now springs into action. So he's met with the Lord. He is rooted in his relationship with the Lord. That is our start point. That is his start point in this moment. And he springs into action. And the first thing he does is he springs into action by having a prayer meeting. So the first thing he does is he gets the priest Abiathar. I don't know where Abiathar's been as they've been sort of milling around. I think he's probably stayed with them. But anyway, so he calls Abiathar. He gets the ephod, which was symbolic of the priesthood and leadership and seeking the Lord, and particularly for guidance. And it's interesting because David, in his wanderings, has not mentioned God for 4 chapters, and he hasn't sought God or inquired of God, which is a sort of recurring theme in his life, to seek the Lord. He hasn't done that for 7 chapters. But on this occasion, strength in the Lord, he starts with this prayer. So now, personally, he sought God. Publicly, he's declaring to everyone, what does God want us to do? And an answer comes very clearly. Go, pursue this raiding party, you'll catch up with them. And so the answer is yes. And so he can launch off, and which is David all over, a man of endeavour. So when God prompts David, he acts and he sees it through. This is what we'll see in this passage. And initially, the answer is yes, but the circumstance just gets worse, right? Have you ever had that before? We've got to do this, it's a yes, and then things get worse. You go, well, hold on, I just had amazing guidance, meant to be doing the next thing, and it's all going wrong. And so he marches off with these troops. Now, they've already marched back to Ziklag for 3 days. They're pretty exhausted. And so when they then go across some wilderness, which is some of the worst wilderness to cross, 600 of them go, 200 don't make it. They just stop, just down to, I can't go on anymore. So this is pretty bad, circumstantially. And he also doesn't actually know where he's going. He's pursuing the Amalekites, hasn't got any idea where he's going. So the answer is yes, but the circumstances get worse. Leading up to today, life for us is quite busy, and I identified 2 days when I would be able to really nail this preparation, right? So I'd get all the slides, everything would be perfect. And those 2 days were the last 2 days. Say Thursday and Friday, which is great. So I did GP, Monday to Wednesday, worked very hard, get to Thursday and Friday, and we're there, I'm there, I'm at my desk. And the first medical thing comes up from a close family member. Can't not do this. So that then sort of plays itself out, and then I'm visiting them, and then there's a call in the middle of the night, it's that thing. While that's playing out, the second medical thing arises with a family member. Getting in the way. And that resulted in the booking, or trying to work out an urgent assessment for them, and we ended up on yesterday in hospital all day while they had surgery. Thankfully, that's done. So just explode, all that time. And you can see, can't you? Yeah, anyway. So that preparation time gone. Do you know what? I loved every moment of it, because I was looking at this thinking, this is it, isn't it? Things go wrong. And I knew I was in the right place. And so sometimes things don't go well, but it doesn't mean God isn't working. And of course, God's providence is all over what next happens, because they come across a hapless random Egyptian. And I think it's quite interesting, this slave, given that David's quite, where he's going, that they actually take the time to come alongside the slave and to help him and revive him and feed him and water him. And eventually, this slave divulges, I'm actually the key, right? I know where the Amalekites are. I know where your women and children are. And so that slave, to whom David I think is quite gracious, turns out providence comes in an unlikely way to be the next step they need. And so David is now on his way. He's got to the Amalekites, and despite their exhaustion, he spends a day fighting until victory is complete. Another 24-hour period fighting. And so this is endeavour. This is endeavour for me. This is something of David's heart that I think we see throughout his life. There's the Goliath episode, of course, which someone is speaking on later. So Pete, I won't say who wins, yeah. So there's that. There's his kingship. There's his leadership. There's his writing the Psalms. There's his worship. There's his dancing before the Lord. David is a man of action and endeavour. And David, I think, shows us that if God prompts, that we also should be people of endeavour. We should act and see things through. And I don't know where you're at the moment, but looking at the last 30 or 40 years, the observation has been made that wrestling with, now AI, but certain social media and the technology revolution, that a sense of perseverance, acting, seeing things through, I think it's a challenge for every generation. But there's certainly enough stats out there, particularly for young people, to know that the amount of entertainment or whatever it is on offer can make it quite hard to commit and see things through. And short-termism is all the rage. Short-termism in terms of marketing is the way to get money out of us quickly, so short-termism is all the rage. And so one of the challenges for me is, to what degree, when God has prompted, am I able to act and see things through? 2016, I came out of partnership at work, general practice partnership, and I'd also left the NAVS leadership. And there were a number of reasons why I think that was the right thing to do. Principally, I think, for family. And we really felt this was right. But I did feel quite bereft. I did feel a lot of loss, and I had a few months where I was seeking God. And I thought, what is the next step? And with NAVS, I think it is a case of, NAVS is a model, hopefully, of discipling, of coming alongside people and helping them grow. But for me, having been a big part of the organisation for a while, I think it was a case of, marry the vision, date the model, yeah? That's so the model might change, but to keep the vision. I had a role in the local church at that time, and I didn't really know where my career was going or where. I just started this role in the local church that I was finding really hard, as I tried to do grassroots discipling ministry. And just to insert at this point, if you're new around the NAVS, what I'm very grateful for in the NAVS is the commitment to take Jesus at his word, really, and to follow his example. And as an organisation, I'm not going to say too much about the NAVS, so I'm not in the NAVS, so I can say what I want. Great, I'm in the network. But no, we're not perfect by any means. But this commitment that I could know Jesus, and as he calls his early disciples, come and I will make you fishers of people, that I could walk with Jesus, and that he would make me able to help others find Jesus and follow him. And that would be visible and measurable in some way, not as in counting numbers, but just measurable. And then further down the line, the people that I help, if I really help them to follow, and I make that a priority, they could then have that same vision in helping others grow. Surely that's touched you. It touched me. Going back to the intimacy point, one of the things I'm most grateful for in the NAVS is when we were running a busy, work up in Edinburgh, and there were big numbers, not because of me, it's because of the people before us. So it turned out there's a lot of responsibility, and my supervisor came up to see me, and I thought, right, I'm not going to say who it was, but he came up to see me, and I thought, right, I've got to make sure I'm doing everything with sort of big work and ministry. I've got to dot all the I's, tick all the boxes, check all the paperwork. And he came up to do this ministry visit. I don't know what that was, but he came up to a ministry visit, and we walked around the park. And his first question to me is, "How is your walk with Christ?" what are you learning about Jesus? And his measure of success was primarily that as a leader, I was walking closely with the Lord Jesus. And he didn't ask that and say, oh, right, let's get on to business now. He genuinely, that was the thing that rooted most of our conversation. And then as things unfolded, of course we went on to all the other things, but it all flowed from, are you keeping Jesus at the centre? Are you following him? Anyway, going back to my story of endeavour. So I'm in this difficult time in 2016, and I prayed, and I was praying, and I was seeking God. And I think the Lord gave me 2 things to do. He said, I want you to start 2 groups. One is going to be a men's group called Cafe Theology, and the other was a group at the school, Wellington College, where we are kind of living and ministering. And I remember at the time being excited, but almost like, okay, yeah, we'll do those, but yeah. And so in 2016, this work started, and I don't really think I knew where it was going, if I'm honest. But I just knew that God was saying, do this, and put one foot in front of the other. And those small groups now have been running for, this is our 10th year. And both continue to run, and people come. And most weeks we get around 12 people to each of these groups, one on a Tuesday, one on a Saturday. And my experience throughout those 10 years has been, it's quite hard to keep going. Often, just churning out the WhatsApp every week, preparing materials, all this sort of stuff. It hasn't been a glorious success story. And yet, because it was something God gave us to do, just by putting one foot in front of the other, just by sticking with people, just by keep praying, we've seen incredible grace and incredible work in both those groups. And I could have stopped, at so many times we could have stopped those groups. But if God prompts, act and see it through. And so far, he's not said to stop doing any of this. And so I lost something of public leadership and the partnership. But what was gained was something that seemed smaller, but has been such an incredible blessing, such a place of fruit. Some of the guys are here today. Very quickly in those groups, God brought around people who could take on leadership. Because I just don't think I could have stuck at it very long, to be honest. And it's been amazing to see how those guys have come through and matured and grown. So my simple thing from David's life and endeavour is act and then see it through. So we're on to our last section now. So, Emmy?
Then David came to the 200 men who had been too exhausted to follow him, and who were left behind at Besor Valley. They came out to meet David and the men with him. As David and his men approached, he asked them how they were. But all the evil men and troublemakers among David's followers said, "Because they did not go out with us, we will not share with them the plunder we recovered. However, each man may take his wife and children and go." David replied, "No, my brothers, you must not do that with what the Lord has given us. He has protected us and delivered into our hands the raiding party that came against us. Who will listen to what you say? The share of the man who stayed with the supplies is to be the same as that of him who went down into the battle. All will share alike." David made this a statute and ordinance for Israel from that day to this. When David reached Ziklag, he sent some of the plunder to the elders of Judah, who were his friends, saying, "Here is a gift for you from the plunder of the Lord's enemies."
Okay, so we come to the end of this story, and the last theme I
thought it would be really helpful to consider, I hope this is helpful, is grace. And I think having considered endeavour, very important that we consider grace so we get things in perspective and realise that any endeavour comes from one source, and that is God. Grace is all we need, and that's come up now. So, as the story moves on, there's an interesting scene now where David has won this victory, he has all this plunder, he's recovered everything that was lost, which is quite incredible, really, that with this raiding party and the burning of Ziklag, there were not, deaths and all sorts of terrible things, but apparently everything is recovered. And he's also got a load of plunder, which will be the other stuff that the Amalekites would have got from their other raids. So he's coming up with more than he started with, in that sense. And on his way back, we have a key moment where they meet these 200 who've been left behind. What do we say to these 200? And here we have the men, some unsavoury characters amongst them, which is possibly why they're so good at fighting. But we have the men, and they're very clear, or certainly some of them are, that this 200 deserve nothing. We have done the work, we have fought, we have risked our lives. They can have their families, that's it. Plunder is ours. And so it's a theology of works, of performance, of those who deserve and those who don't. And David meets this with a theology of grace. David's understanding is completely different, and he meets it with the theology of grace. And David is really strong in what he says here, and I think it's an example for us, and it points us to the New Testament, to Jesus and his grace to us. But he's really strong, and that he says no to the guys, you mustn't do this. And he's very clear that all that they have is what the Lord has given them, and that the Lord has protected them, and that the Lord has rescued all the families as well throughout this. So David's eyes are on Yahweh, which has been the case all the way through this story, that it's not on what people are expecting of him or demanding of him. His eyes are on Yahweh. And David is convinced of a number of things about Yahweh, principally the goodness of God, but also his sovereignty and his provision. David's disposition is one of gratitude and love for the God who has given him everything. This is his start point. And often when in the Old Testament we see so much of God's grace, but it isn't necessarily announced to us like, here we are, here's grace. You just work your way through the story and see, wow, look at that. And so I think David's aware that he's just got himself in a ridiculous situation where he was just about to go and fight Israel for the Philistines. God's brought him back. God's delivered them, led them to this place, got the families back, won the victory. He's done all these things. God provided a random Egyptian, so providence is all over this. He's so aware of what God's done for him. And the wider picture of God's grace is seen in David's story again and again and again and again, and many of those will be unpacked later in seminars. And as a result, David is living by grace, and this is one of those moments where he demonstrates grace. And not just for this moment. It's interesting that the text goes on to say that this became a statute and an ordinance for Israel from that day. So in other words, grace, a gracious statute, a gracious ordinance, a generous ordinance, actually enshrined into their whole way of being, whole way of life. So it's an important moment, an important act. And later, I love the grace we see in David's life. Later, David will show grace to Saul. So around this time, Saul is losing the kingdom. He's about to lose that battle that David didn't go to. And he will die, and Jonathan will die, or have died. Where are we? 30, yes. So this is inserted. And David will then mourn them. And the fascinating thing about David when he mourns Saul is that he sings a song for Saul, or a psalm, and that's found in 2 Samuel chapter 1, the one after this one. And he speaks of Saul, the king who pursued him and tried to kill him, who drove him out of Israel for these 2 years. he speaks of Saul as lovely, the Lord's beloved, the glory of Israel. How the mighty have fallen. He mourns Saul with such grace that the Bible doesn't have, the chroniclers and Samuel don't speak so well of Saul as David does. So David's disposition is one of grace, and he sees the wider picture of God's grace throughout. And so I guess the question for us, just from this snippet, is to what degree grace is characterising first your experience. Is your experience, is our daily walk with God one of gratitude, gladness, freedom, peace? I'm not talking about not suffering, because there's a lot of suffering in life, but I'm talking about something that is beautiful, that is abundant. Is that how we see God? Do we live the day thinking of his goodness? And then as we do that, whether we're leading or ministering or whatever we're doing, do we do so by grace? It's very easy to begin by grace, but then continue with works. Many Christian ministries and churches can operate on that basis. You get in by grace, but as soon as you're in, there's a sense of heaviness, of burden, of obligation, of duty. Often this is set by us as leaders, and it's not a grace environment, it's a works environment. And that's not an environment that produces life, or growth, or hope, or joy. Going back to our small groups, one of the experiences we've had is that I haven't got time to do all the things I'd like to do. And when I was a good navigator, I had lots of brilliant resources, and done all this stuff, and I was really well prepared, and all this. And actually, family life and other things have often meant that when we've rocked up to these groups, I've not been able to do that. And it's taken me a long time to realise that if we just create an environment of grace, if we just create a place where we say, Lord, come, may this be an oasis for you, may this be a refreshing place. We can use others' resources at times, but there are times when you are not, on top of your game, and yet so often, by accessing grace in that way, by trusting God, he has worked. And I don't think, if we'd been driven about this, we'd have been able to maintain and keep going in our faith and in this kind of open-homed, relational disciple making. I don't think we've had any chance of getting anywhere. We'd have just burnt out all too quickly. So do we minister by grace? I'm going to finish with a story. Actually, our time's gone, hasn't it? How are we doing? We're well over time, yeah? Yeah, no. Okay, right, very quick story then. Yeah, go on then. All right. So a number of years ago, we had a team of young people who went off to South America, and this does translate into sort of some of the stuff here. There was one guy on this team who was particularly difficult. So we're thrown together for 12. A team of 12 for 4 months, and we're in Bolivia, in the mountains, then in the jungle. Everyone's really excited, and this is going to be amazing, and it's a sort of mission group with Latin, you may know the work. And one guy is particularly difficult, very obnoxious, very aggressive, and he just puts his headphones in all day, or his AirPods or whatever he had in those days, and just listen to heavy metal. Literally, he went like that. He was like that. And within a few weeks, everyone was really struggling with this guy. He argued and fallen out with everyone. So anyway, I was praying about this, and something came into my head about grace. Okay, because at that point, all I wanted to do was kill the person, kill him. But something about grace just arrested this, and I strengthened myself in the Lord. I was on my knees, and I wanted to tell him how terrible he was. I wanted to, because I was actually meant to be leading the team with my wife Emmy, and God stopped me and He said, "Do not break this man. Do not break this man." And grace sometimes needs to be thoughtfully applied. Okay, my experience of people showing me grace and creating environments, it's not always straightforward how to be gracious in any particular position. Sometimes we have to think and pray about it. And in this situation, God just said, "Don't break this man." And then He said, "What you're feeling, the team are feeling, why don't you recruit the team to help you?" So I thought, okay, well, I'm not sure where we're going with this, but what does that mean? And so what we then did is we met up with individual members of the team and say, "How are you doing?" And they all said how much they were struggling with this person. We said, "Well, yeah, he's obviously having a hard time. Why don't we? How could we help this person to flourish in this team? How could we?" "Well, I'm going to do that." "No, well, we could do that. We could hit him. But what about other things that we do?" And so we found things that like he was good at, and then he liked that, which tends to be like physical things, like breaking things and playing football, as long as he was striker. Anyway, gradually the team come round through prayer and through me being on my knees, and I honestly didn't feel gracious at all for a long, long, long time. But God just kept saying, "Look, just keep this going." So we keep going. Halfway through the team, there's one girl who absolutely hates him and can't get on him. So there's one person that we failed to recruit to loving this guy. And there's not really another option because we're all cramped together in the jungle. There's nowhere else to go. So halfway through the team, I'm sitting down and we're having our mid-team catch-up, and I have to do a DMC, a deep meaningful chat, with each of the guys. So I sit down with this guy. "How's it going?" And he goes, "Well, no, everyone hates me, I hate them." And I said, "Oh, okay, whatever." But he said, and I feel such a plate, and this sort of went on for a bit. And I said, "Wait a second." I said, "That's funny you said that, because as a team we really love you." And silence. So that was my one. I did want to use that love because we did love you. And anyway, I look up and he's in tears. Okay, and he says, "No one has ever said that." And I said, "No one's ever said what?" "No one's ever said they love me." "Okay, outside your family, no one has ever said that they love you." And he goes, No one has ever said that they love me. Not my parents, no one." And I said, well, but we love you, Anyway, a turnaround starts happening. And by the end of this 4 months together, he is a transformed man because of the grace shown him by God, but by the team who chose not to break this man. And there was this girl, we went around at the end and said, "What have you learned about your amazing time in Bolivia?" And we were expecting people to talk about, "I've learned about, playing, beautiful fruit, or the jungle, or the Bolivian people," and lots of these good things were shared. This girl, who couldn't stand him, said, "I'll tell you what I've learned. I'll tell you, what's encouraging is it? My encouragement, my inspiration, him. Seeing the change in him, that is the most inspiring and amazing thing of my time in Bolivia." Cue group hug. So for me, that was an example of a kicking and screaming, being forced by God into somehow some sort of environment of grace, and it is so transformative. And I finish now with this verse because I think this brings our three things together. Thank you for being so patient. But by the grace of God, I am what I am, and His grace towards me was not in vain. On the contrary, I worked harder than any of them, that is, the other apostles, Peter and co. Though it was not I, but the grace of God that is with me. In those verses, we see Paul writing down, and I think he captures intimacy, endeavour, and grace, all beautifully related, all words of God. So Paul's intimacy with God is clear. He knows God has loved him and has graced him. Paul's endeavour here is clear in that he says, "I worked harder than all the others." Not to compete. But where's that all coming from? It's coming from grace, and a second time grace, and a third time grace. Is there three graces? Three graces in there. And so if you want a verse that to take forward, I just throw it out there as a verse that's really, really, really helped me. and I think maybe unites these themes for the day. But have a great day. I hope that intimacy, endeavour and grace are helpful ways in, and we'll